there was no scene where I was like, oh, I would have wanted to do more, or I don't like how that turned out. If I had more, I was thrilled with every single one. I cried watching it again. I mean, it really, really moved me.
Well, let me start off also with congratulations on your episode of Strange New Worlds. It's being called one of the best Star Trek courtroom episodes ever, also by me. And it's one of the best hours of Star Trek since the 1990s. What has that been like for you seeing that reception?
It's kind of surreal because I was so excited to be hired and then had so much fun making it. I mean, literally one of my most fun experiences. And it was great. I mean, I used to be a scientist. And so part of why I left science to direct film and television was I felt like I had something to say. We live in a world that has so much repair we need to do that I feel like, you're taking up space on this earth if you're not trying to make it a better place. And so for me, getting to tell a story that can reach so many people through such an epic franchise that is about something so essential to being human, ironically, because it's about whether you're human or not, but this idea of how we connect and how we treat each other. So getting to do that, work with this phenomenal crew, work with Benji Bakshi, who's a collaborator, the DP, and I did 2 shows before this, and he's the one who recommended me for the job. It was just a blast to make it and then have it come out and get that kind of response, because you're always nervous. Like you're going to be compared to the other court martial episodes, which are phenomenal, some of the best Trek work out there. And not just to be compared favorably to them, but like you said, many people have said what you said, which is best episode since the 90s. And I mean, it's just icing on the cake, right? You don't even think about that, and then it happens. So, I mean, I'm just so honored and thrilled that I got to do this episode.
Yeah, the courtroom drama is a pretty revered subgenre within Star Trek. There aren't that many, but they're always like so highly regarded. When you got to the Una trial episode, like, were you like, whoa, did you feel pressure to live up to that?
Yes and no. To be totally honest, I wasn't very familiar with Star Trek before doing it. And I learned in my interview and when I got this episode that this was a canonical subgenre of Star Trek, which excited me. I'd done courtroom shows before, Suits and Bull and For the People and How to Get Away with Murder. And so I was familiar with that style of storytelling, but then to watch Measure of a Man and Menagerie and see how deep they go into ethics and morality and who should be judging I was like, oh my God, I get to do this. I was just so excited. And for me as a director, I feel like something I love doing is taking idea and theme and marrying it with character and dramatizing it that way. And so it was just the perfect match of what I love to do. And so I don't know that I felt pressure other than the pressure I always feel as a director to do my best. And Henry and Akiva and Dana, who wrote the episode, and Chris Fisher, who hired me, they were so supportive the whole time and accessible and available for questions or to talk about what was really important in this episode that I don't know that I felt nervous. I think I just felt like I have a job to do and I'm going to knock it out of the park for you guys because I want to and I care about you in this franchise.
Well, you did. You knocked it out of the park.
Thank you.
I would love to know what challenges you faced directing this episode. You have an amazing cast. You have a great script by Dana Horgan, as you said. Take me through a little bit of the process of putting the episode together. Like, what did you find challenging?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always challenging. Any courtroom episode's challenging because there's so much coverage in one location that you have to keep it interesting and moving despite being a very talky episode, right? And so we were in our courtroom, I feel like we were in there 7 days, 6 or 7 days. That's a really long time to be in one location where everyone's wearing the same costume every single day and tracking, okay, where are we in the story? Where are we emotionally? And I think for the most part, we got to shoot it in sequence, which I really like to do because it's just better for the actors, better for performance. And so, the way we sort of overcame the challenges of that was I rehearsed it like a play. So I went to the space with my DP before we even invited actors and just said, where do we want to set these tables that they're at? Where do we want the judges? Do we want a observers in the room, like where are the good angles, and how can we use the space? And by putting them where we put them, we were able to allow Neera to have this opportunity that became our cinematic language of when she pushes the camera versus when the camera's retreating from her. And I'll talk about that in a second. I'd love to share some of the rules we came up with for the visual language. And so we sort of figured out where the interesting camera blocking opportunities were. And then, I was an actor when I was young, and so I have a really good feel for where the beats are and subtext and what a character might do. And so I sort of got a sense of where I might want to move, if I were them. And then we did a rehearsal. We do like sort of a table read first, where we sort of go through the pages and talk about the beats. And then we were so lucky to have time with our actors and bring them in and get to rehearse with them. And so I pitched some ideas I was thinking based on this prep I did, and they were on board with it, which was great. And then, Rebecca doesn't get to move that much in the courtroom. She's basically, at her table and then on the witness stand. But Yetide, Neera, obviously moves so much. And so I pitched her some ideas for when she's on this side of the courtroom. And you'll notice in our opening arguments, she comes around the table. And then with Admiral, April, yes. With him, I had her for the first time push to the judges, right? And then we complete the circle at the end with the closing arguments going around the other way to the judges. And so these were all very intentional ideas. And, she was just so game to try them and make them hers and speak up about what worked for her and what didn't. So we were so fortunate to get that theater rehearsal before we ever shot. And then, of course, Benji and I went and really determined what were our shots and angles. When did we want to be over Batel's shoulder and include her? When did we want to be clean on Rebecca? When did we want Neera and Una to be in the same frame or people to be alone? I mean, so every shot was thought about and intentional for emotional storytelling.
Yeah, and this was an episode, as you said, with no action, no phasers, no space battles. It's all people just talking to each other, arguing ideas and points of view. But to me, that's what Star Trek is. That's why it was so refreshing to see.
Absolutely. And that's what was exciting to me as a scientist. Like, you get at truth through debate, right? And when both sides are coming to it honestly and not trying to manipulate, but honest pursuit of knowledge and expressing what they know in the moment. And then it's changed with new information. That's how points of view change, is when you really have honest argument. And so for me, it just spoke to me as a person, and this is how I try to live my life. And so I was very excited to get something like this.
Did you have a favorite scene in the episode where you yelled cut and you were like, yes, we nailed it. That was it.
I mean, I love so many of them. I love Yetide's closing arguments, where she comes around and confronts the judges. I just loved that. I really love the scene between Neera and La'an in Una's quarters, because gosh, La'an is such a strong character and has to be strong all the time. She's head of security. That's what she does. She protects other people, but we all need protection of our own hearts. And for Neera to come in as an outsider who has mixed feelings about Starfleet in the first place, and to take care of La'an, was just such a beautiful expression of humanity and sisterhood. And the acting is just off the charts and so subtle, but so full. So that was absolutely one of my favorite scenes. But I feel like I just rewatched it. There was no scene where I was like, oh, I would have wanted to do more, or I don't like how that turned out. If I had more, I was thrilled with every single one. I cried watching it again. I mean, it really, really moved me.
Yeah, you get Tide Badaki. She owns every scene she's in. She's instantly one of the best Star Trek guest stars. I interviewed her last week and we talked about the standing ovation she got at the end, which I don't think I've ever seen in Star Trek before. Like, I've never seen the main cast applaud a guest star like that. It felt spontaneous, but she said it was scripted.
I think I'd have to look back at my script. I take her word for it, of course, but yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of emotional new stuff that this episode allowed our cast to do, like the hug between Anson and Rebecca. It was just like, I remember, I can't remember, I think it might have been Anson who pitched it. I don't think, it was not scripted. I believe Anson pitched it, or I had the idea, but maybe it was driven by him, and I loved it. And I said, has anyone done this before? Like, do they hug in Star Trek? And he's like, no, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I hope I'm not wrong, but it's like, I think this would be an anomaly. I was like, I love it. And so I think I ran it by Henry. I wanted to make sure, because that's a big moment, right? If you're wrong and you're just breaking what you're allowed to do on a series like this. And Henry loved it. And I was like, oh, great, because it's the right choice. It absolutely should happen, because the stakes of this trial were so high, not just for Una, but also for Pike. Once Pasok calls him out and you realize he's on the hook and his entire team is on the hook, this is everything. This is the pinnacle of threat to this group. And so, I mean, of course a hug is warranted.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted about that hug because that hug moved me so much. And you're right, it is kind of an anomaly. Like that's why it was so striking to see Pike drop the captain, hug his friend, and then snap back the captain with a little punch at the end.
Yeah, and even just the awkward vulnerability. And that's what I love about these actors is they're not just playing a moment, they're playing the connective tissue between the moment. So he doesn't just go from something emotional to a joke of like, hey, that was good. Like he played the transition from them, and you can just see the vulnerability and the little bit of embarrassment in there. And it's just, they're so skilled and just so wonderful to direct.
Now, your episode also has really complex themes, racial prejudice and persecution within the Federation. But I love that at its core, it was about two childhood friends who had a falling out and one coming to rescue the other. And there was so much depth to Una and Neera's relationship, even if we only got a few details. But let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's very hard to get people, rightfully so, on board with storytelling that's just didactic and message driven. And as much as I like what I do to be about something, because otherwise, what are we doing here, right? Let's try to change people's minds and hearts. The way in, as you said, and I just remembered it again watching it, was these two young girls with broken hearts reconnecting. And I have two daughters, and I very much remember that age, how much friendship means to you. And when you're hurt, it can last a lifetime. And so there's so many great moments in this episode where they're in the prison cell, and they talk about, well, you weren't the one left behind. And, and they get at it. And it's, even as an adult, it's so, as much as Neera is such a badass lawyer, the scariest thing is to let someone know they hurt you, right? Like, it's much easier to argue a case than like say you hurt me and I'm still hurt and I love you and I'd like to be friends again. I mean, like, so anyway, that bubbles up repeatedly in the episode, and it does in the trial. And I remember, I think towards when Una's on the stand, towards the end of her monologue, I think my direction to them was like, it's like you're at a sleepover party and it's the middle of the night and you're telling each other these things, and just constantly trying to reconnect them to that inner child that was hurt, that had a broken heart a long time ago. And they're so wonderful. We, from the beginning of my time directing it, we spent a lot of time together. We had dinner, the three of us, and got to know each other. And they both shared very personal things with me. And Rebecca shared things that I would say to her when we were actually shooting. Rebecca, is it okay if I remind you of this vulnerable thing for you to access? And she was like, yes. And so they dug deep, and I think it really shows. And I was proud to be part of that.
It was really, every scene between Neera and Una was riveting, in and outside of the courtroom. And then there were also these two moments that really stood out for me that I loved, which was Uhura standing up to La'an when she wanted the personal logs, and then Spock, the comedy of Ortegas and Mbenga watching Spock, and then Spock apologizing for his outburst, like classic Spock, really, really funny, and a standout like little levity moment in a pretty serious episode.
Yeah, I'm so happy we had both of those. And again, everything's about notes. It's a symphony, right? If you're hitting everything the same, you don't notice the drama, if you don't have something to contrast it with. And I love that the comedy was earned. It wasn't just extraneous. It really was part of the story. And so, and I'll talk about the Ahura and La'an moment. What's so wonderful about the way Strange New Worlds runs the show is that they give a director 20 minutes during prep with each actor. You can obviously have more, but they set up these meetings in my office with each one of them. And even though this was more heavily focused on Una and Neera and a bit more on Pike and Batel and La'an, I got to meet with everybody. And so I would meet with them and talk about their individual arcs for the episode. And, if they were in it less, I would talk about, well, what's your character's feelings about eugenics? And where are you? What's your philosophy? And how do you feel about Una being on trial? I know you love her, but do you kind of think what she did was right or wrong? I really wanted them to think about that so that when we were in the ready room and they were watching it, they could have very specific reactions. And great performances are all about arcs. Where do you start and where do you end? And so Celia and I spent a lot of time talking about her relationship with La'an and what does she think about Una? And I think we talked about, I hope I'm getting this right, but that she felt a bit betrayed that Una had done this. And so she was dealing with her own feelings about this and, how the eugenics wars affected her parents. And so there was a lot personally at stake for her character that she could latch onto. And so in that one scene with her and La'an, I think it felt so rich because we'd really mined what were all her thoughts around this. And so her getting to stand up to her superior because she had strong feelings about what was going on, I think made it feel more complex and interesting than if we hadn't had those conversations. So
totally. Now, I've only seen the first 6 episodes. Are you back to direct in season 2 or season 3?
Yeah, I've been invited to direct an episode in season 3. So
awesome.
I'm really excited.
That's so great. Yeah. I mean, obviously the writer's strike has kind of pushed everything back, but I'm so glad to hear that you're coming back.
Thank you.
Yeah. I can't ask you what it's about or anything.
I don't even know. We were we would have shot it already, but the strike ended up pushing all of production. So
wow. So it was a fairly early episode in the season then.
It's an early episode. Yeah. And it sounds phenomenal. So I'm really, really excited.
Cool. Well, before I let you go, I'd love to ask you about your other pursuits outside of directing. As you said, you just spoke to the WWF, not the pro wrestling company, but
we just made that joke actually because everyone. Okay.
So please tell me about the water bears and what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, it's funny. I talked about this show on this coffee chat we just did about the panda paddle that was, open to the public to come hear about it. So basically the World Wildlife Fund is a conservationist organization. It's not just about saving animals. It's about saving our earth and protecting nature. And so I've been involved for the past 4 years in the panda paddle, which is a fundraiser. You get out on the water, you can kayak, you can paddleboard, you can canoe, you can even surf because you're using your arms to get out there. And so I have this team of probably about 20 people right now, and they're all over the world. I have someone in Australia and Luxembourg, all over the country, and you virtually paddle in August during these certain dates because it started during COVID, right? And so you could paddle wherever you lived and still be on this team. And we were the top fundraiser last year. We raised $7,000, and I won a beautiful custom paddle board that I'm very, very proud of. And we are back doing it again. And it's kind of like what made me so thrilled to do that Star Trek episode is, we don't want to just take up space on this earth. Can we please do something good to replenish it? And so I'm very proud to be part of this. And if anyone wants to join or donate, we're called the Water Bears, and we'd love to have you. It's a really special, exciting team. And we share photos of the water and our paddles and have lawyers, actors, doctors, everybody on this team. So if you want to join, John, we'd love to have you.
That's so cool. Send me the links. I'll at least put them in this interview.
Okay, great. Thank you. I love it.
Also, are you aware of Star Trek's link to the tardigrade?
I am. Yes, I should talk about that. Yes, I forgot about that. And
yeah,
Ethan, who plays Spock, we've talked about that too. Yes. Thank you. So we named ourselves the Water Bears, which is to think about than the tardigrades. It's a less scientific name. But we did that because they're the most resilient creatures on Earth, as you know, and they can survive nuclear fission, the hottest temperatures and the coldest temperatures. They're found on the moon even. And so as I mentioned, we started during COVID, and I was like, we need something to believe in. We're all resilient. We're going to get through this together. And that's why we became the tardigrades. And yes, so I know if you want to add to that about the Star Trek connection, but I remember that there was.
Well, yeah, in Star Trek Discovery Season 1, there was a giant space tardigrade that became the navigator of the USS Discovery's when they had the Spore Drive, their instantaneous teleportation device. And they couldn't figure out how to make this thing work because because the experiments would crash the ship into different objects wherever they tried to land. And they found out that they needed a navigator, but it was this giant tardigrade that was able to communicate with the mycelial network that became their first navigator. But they were also abusing the tardigrade by doing it, so they had to let it go. And then Stamets, Anthony Rapp's character, became the new navigator. But that's Star Trek's link to the tardigrade.
I love it. See, everything's connected. That's why we got to take care of every interaction and relationship because it all has a consequence. And that's great. I love that.
That's awesome. Valerie, I'm going to let you go. I've taken up a lot of your time, but thank you so much for this. I adored your episode. Thank you for making one of the all-time great Star Trek episodes. I can't wait for your next one. And thanks for talking to me.
Thank you, John. Thanks for your passion and taking the time. I love your writing, and this is very exciting to me. Thank you.